and this is Day 9 Daily number 458, where we learn to be a better gamer. In today's Terran vs. Protoss Daily, we're going to be doing part 1 of a 2-part daily that explores how to beat Protoss in a very general sense, which is really broken into the following 2 parts. One is how to get aggressive in the mid-game to gain that edge that you need, and then the end of part 2 will be focused on how to win in the end game. We'll be doing that on Tuesday, because a lot of people are concerned about the Death Ball Terran vs. Protoss army and how to deal with it. So we'll do that all on Tuesday. Yeah, awesome. Now, in other, of course, per usual, important, excellent tournament news, there is an event upcoming that I'm sure many of you have heard announced. If you haven't, you're going to see right now. Let me just hit the F11, full screening it. Here it comes. Da-da-da-da-dum. Bam! The Red Bull Battlegrounds in Austin, Texas. This is actually a post that was made on Team Liquid. It's listed under Red Bull Battlegrounds, as you might imagine. And this is taking place on Memorial Day weekend. I'm helping to put it on and, of course, doing the casting, along with Husky, DJ Wheat, and Rob Simpson. And the lineup is super sick thus far. Let me just scroll down to the invited players, where I'm sure you recognize a lot of those names, and there's still 4 more to be announced. It is a 16-person invitational, and it's going to be absolutely outrageous because I just looked at the venue a few weeks back. I actually got to go do a site visit, and it's pretty decked out and awesome. And the obvious reason I'm telling you this is I would love it if you came. If you'd be so kind as to hop in a carpool. If you're anywhere in the Midwest, or actually anywhere in the entire United States, get like 10 people in a car and just go. It'd have to be a big car then. I guess get 10 people in a bus, or 5 people in 2 cars spread out to bring 10 total. And I wanted to, of course, note that the seating is limited. There's, I think, only 1,500 and something seats. So you can buy tickets individually for each day. So if you only want to make one day, you know, if you're busy trying to finish up final exams, which would totally suck, and you should just not show up to your final exams anyways. But if you wanted, you can split it up over 2 days. And there's these group promo code thingaruhas, where if you go as a group and want to get some extra special bonuses, contact the Texas Esports Association. It's also listed in the thread how to do that, and you can get bonus rewards like a chance to get backstage tour and free Red Bull and a chance to high-five cool people. Yeah! All the prizes are listed out there. And other than that, it's just going to be 2 days of totally kick-ass fun, and Friday night, the third day, or excuse me, the start day of the 3 days, is going to be a fan meet and greet. So come meet and greet. And that's it. That's all I have to say about the Red Bull land. Please come out. Please, please come out. Please. And of course, the one thing I'd never want to have happen to you is if you waited too long to buy tickets and it filled up. Just saying, it's not unlimited capacity, because I know a lot of events are where they just jam as many nerds into a hall as possible until we're nothing but a giant collection of fire hazards. But no, limited seating. Alas, alack, what can you do? Yeah. That's on the 25th, 26th, 27th of May. Celebrate the end of school by doing StarCraft-related things. And if you can't wait that long, there is another LAN that I'll be at this weekend in like 6 days, the MSI tournament that's going to be at the Green Forest Cafe in Ventura, California. You can see the address right there. So this is actually within driving distance for me. So I'll be there this weekend. So you should come hang out. And that's all I have to say about that. That is all the tournament announcements for the day. Let's hop into the Terran vs. Protoss topic of the daily after I drink this water. Oh, they make water so good in LA. The city cares. Now, there was a recent article, and you'll note why I had this browser open. Look how many articles I'm bringing up. This was a very controversial thread that popped up recently, the Terran vs. Protoss late game comment from Blizzard, where, you know, basically this excerpt that's written by David Kim, I believe, their lead balance designer, goes on to say that, or goes on to address some of the concerns in the Terran vs. Protoss matchup from the Terran point of view. In the matchup, a lot of Terrans are saying, I can't beat the endgame Protoss composition, period. I just can't beat it. It's too powerful. The Colossus Storm, Speed Zealot, Blink Stalker, Archon mix just blows my Marine Marauder out of the water. What to do? Blizzard released a series of statistics that essentially showed that the Terran vs. Protoss matchup win rate is about 50-50. So nothing statistically of concern, and people are saying, well, yeah, I mean, the Terrans maybe win in the early game, but once you get to late game, there's nothing to do, and there's this huge crisis. And Blizzard made a very controversial response to this that I actually think is spot on and absolutely brilliant, and what we're going to be looking at for the next 2 days. Their comment is the following. Sure, Protoss might be really good in the late game. However, Terran is really good at being aggressive in the mid game, and in general very good at being aggressive in those mid to small numbers at any point in the game. In other words, what the Terran player has to do in the mid game is to do a lot of aggression in order to get an edge, and then the Protoss, when they get to that late game mix, might be in trouble if they took too much damage in the mid game. And a lot of people seem to go to the extreme ends of things and say things like, oh my god, so Blizzard, you're saying that I have to win in the mid game as Terran? Well, that's not exactly true. That's not exactly what Blizzard's saying. You have to just do damage in the matchup in the mid game as Terran. Get some sort of big edge as Terran in the mid game. And this is exactly how we see it playing out across all high levels, especially in the GSL. We see this quite pronounced, and that's what we're going to be looking at in parts 1 and 2. Today's daily and the daily on Tuesday. So today's daily, we're going to be looking at 4 games. In part 1, we're going to be looking at 2 games where Marine King Prime essentially does a ton of damage in the mid game and ends up outright winning. We'll also see in those games how much leeway you get as Terran, and a little bit about, you know, what Blizzard is talking about. Why, or what the Terran player can get away with. In part 2, we're going to take a look at a longer game, and we're going to see how EG's Puma gets an edge in the mid game, and when they get to late game, even though the Protoss player has this death composition, Puma is able to crush it by all the advantage that he got in the mid game. And then in the last part, part 3 of the daily, we're going to be looking at Marine King Prime basically blowing it. He did an incredible job in the mid game, but kind of faltered a little bit. So that way we can see the trap that we don't want to fall into. That is what's going to be going on today. So I wanted to, excuse me, relate this all back to the idea of expansion count. Because it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking of just the mixes, to say, how do you beat Archon Colossus? And the answer is, how many bases does he have? What's the situation we're in? And for some reason, this tends to fall out of the mind when you get to a high enough base count. Like, if he's going Colossus, Archon, Zealot, if he's at 3 or 4 or 5 bases, it's, you know, he's building that stuff. It's not actually true. For instance, imagine, think of a Protoss on 1 base going for a 4-gate. Just imagine in your head all the times that's ever happened, that you've seen. Protoss is basically trying to win right then and there. Or you're watching a Protoss versus Protoss and everything's normal. But, you know, in Protoss versus Terran or Protoss versus Zerg, if you envision a Protoss 4-gating on 1 base, think of that feel that you have in your head of Protoss really desperately needing to win the game right then and there. Now, I want you to think of the Protoss player with an expansion going 4 gates. Just envision in your head how different the feeling is now of how that Protoss player is supposed to play. And I want to emphasize the word feeling. Notice how different that feels, a 1-base 4-gate versus a 2-base 4-gate. If you see those, you'd have wildly different reactions no matter really what level of gameplay you're at. In the 2-base circumstance, maybe Protoss is going to do some aggression. Maybe he's going to go for a 3rd. Maybe he'll build a Robo and play a little bit more standardly. Now, I want to do the same thing for Terran versus Protoss. A Terran player who's going Marine Marauder Viking Ghost Medevac, right? The Marine Marauder Medevac for a nice base mixture. That's pretty typical. And then the Ghost Viking for the extra special support stuff. That is the big late game composition for the Terran. On 2 bases, Terran essentially has 1 shot to do everything perfectly and then is still going to have trouble reinforcing. But now imagine a Terran doing that on 4 bases. If you didn't have wildly different feelings between a 2-base Terran versus Protosser and a 4-base Terran versus Protosser with this late game death composition, this is exactly what we're talking about in today's daily and Tuesday's daily. How these expansions matter so much. So what we're going to do is we are going to change my mouse settings so I can actually move off the screen and do my switcher. Ah, excellent. And we're going to look at this game between Marine King Prime and JYP. What we're going to be seeing throughout this part 1 is the fact that in the mid-game, Terran can get away with a whole lot from essentially the 10-minute to the 16-minute mark. The Terran player has a big window where he needs to do something. Again, our goal is that we're going to do so much damage in the mid-game that we will be ahead on expansions and ahead on tech, so that way by the time Protoss is getting his big scary Deathball, Storm, Archon, Colossus, Zealot mixture, by the time he has all that, we have too many expansions and we just overrun him. That's the entire goal that we're going to be looking at in Terran vs. Protoss. This will happen throughout the matchup that you will see at all levels, the way this flows off. So, we're going to watch Marine King Prime and JYP do pretty much very standard plays. That sounds really loud. Yes, that is super loud. Excellent. I was playing Marine Arena recently, so I had to turn my volume up so I could hear everything dying. So Marine King Prime is going to do the most standard opening in this matchup, a 1 barracks expand. JYP is also going to do the most standard thing you can do as Protoss, a 1 gateway expand. Everything right now is as normal as can be. We'll be looking at crazier things, but for this introductory game, I wanted to note the normalcy of things. Sure, this Zealot harass can be somewhat annoying, but Marine King Prime is a little bit too good to lose to this. Okay, so Terran is going to be following this up with a double gas. Again, super typical. Marine King Prime will then be getting a tech lab, an engineering bay, and then a factory. And this is increasingly becoming the common build. You end up focusing on Stim and +1, and then the add-ons, and then going for the dropship stuffs. Meanwhile, in Camp JYP, he too is going for a very normal-looking build. He's expanded, and now he has 3 gates and a robo. Excellent. All this goody goodness. Yeah, this is pretty typical. A lot of Protosses will do this, try to put some pressure on at the start. I don't really care too much about this phase of the game. It's starting right about at 10 minutes when these medevacs pop out. JYP is starting to go into get the big death ball mode. Literally right as the medevacs pop out. Alright, here at... Nah, damn. I stopped it at 10:01. Alack. This is the standard Terran mid-game, where you have medevacs coming out, you have 3 barracks with some number of add-ons here, and you must do a good bit of damage. It's very easy to look at this period of time and to over-obsess about, oh, well, the Protoss is going to have his upgrades going, he's going to be getting the 2-2 upgrades, he's getting the Colossus up. But this is the vision that I want you to just see as Protoss. We have our Stalkers at the back. We have... Whoopsie daisies. Let me... Gameplay. Selected. Marine Arena, messing up all my settings. We have JYP having all his Sentry Zealot at the front. We see that we're getting our Colossus up. But as you look at the minimap, there's literally nothing that we can do offensive-wise. Literally nothing. This is almost always the case. There's actually nothing that Protoss can do from about now till about 16 minutes. Like, nothing. And it's Terran's job to be taking expansions, making sure the medevac drop pressure is really kicking into high gear. And this is true no matter what the strategies end up really being. Sure, Terran is going to be putting pressure on with a direct push at the front. This is increasingly becoming, again, the most common standard. And then these sort of nice manipulations moving around. Some up on the high ground, some up on the low ground, just manipulating this placement. Notice that medevac fell. We have some Marine Marauder coming up at the front. Things are actually pretty reasonably good for JYP in terms of the defensive front. JYP's done a reasonably good job defending all of this. However, back home, we see that MKP is doing something with this mid-game time that he has bought. Namely, he's getting these upgrades going. Oh, and he's also rallying all his Marine Marauder out. You know, wants to kill these pylons off. And this is the thing that starts to look like a total loss for the Terran player. But again, we have a ton of time bought just because we've seen this player go Colossus and we've started to keep his unit count low. This is the smart way to win in this matchup. NKP doesn't actually have that much, 15 Marines, 5 Marauders, but it's the fact that he's being aggressive means that he can get away with these double ups and he can get away with this expansion, as long as he kills the pylon. The smaller the numbers that you have, the better the Marine Marauder aggression will be. And now, after he has finally gotten these upgrades started and this command center started, now he's backing up and getting more barracks. Not really going too crazy with it. Still, look at JYP's vision. He has this force moving out, but in his unit station, we see 3 Colossus, 6 Stalkers, 1 Sentry, 5 Zealots. From about 10 minutes to 16 minutes, quite literally, Protoss cannot easily attack. I should say he can't attack and get a third at the same time. So this means that Marine King Prime has plenty of leeway to apply pressure. Okay, so now this goes down, the third base goes down, and we see Marine King Prime continuing to poke, continuing to get a little bit aggressive. But most notably, we see that the food count is starting to very heavily favor Marine King Prime. He's not getting wildly ahead in worker count. It's actually just that his macro and his production is really kicking into high gear. And it's in this mid-game period where we actually start to see, one, the advantage being gained by Terran by going for this long-term play, getting the upgrades, getting the expansion up. More importantly, two, a Protoss is not very careful with his Colossus Stalker force and ends up losing all of it relatively easily. Now, this is the part where people will start to get their analysis way off base. Almost always when this happens, people will say, oh, the Protoss messed up huge. Oh, he should have had it back home and he would have been okay. Therefore, Protoss should have been able to get to the endgame and win. And it's that last step that's the struggle. Obviously, Protoss made a mistake. I don't think anyone will disagree with that one. But the problem is in saying that Protoss is in a much better situation if he leaves that back home. Let's take a look at this phase of the game at 14 minutes and 50 seconds. Envision this army, this whole thing, simply placed back here. We have some Colossus Stalker here, we have some Colossus Stalker here. Well, we have this huge army moving down, heading towards this third, and you know what happens if Protoss has all his stuff in the right position? Marine King Prime takes a fourth base and gets a Ghost Academy, and then starts going for 3-3. And as Protoss, again, looking at my Protoss vision, how on earth can I be aggressive? There's absolutely nothing that I can do about the fact that this fourth base would be going down. And this is essentially how mid-game aggression will look as Terran. You're kind of getting in his face, stopping and stuttering and going, and you might win there, but most of the time you will just do some damage and you can get an expansion. Do some damage and you can get some upgrades up. Do some damage and do something that focuses on the late game. And that is the core idea in all of Terran vs. Protoss. We're going to take a look at another completely different game. Let me go ahead and just give you the satisfaction of seeing the win. With these mid-game aggressive mixtures, they don't have that many ghosts. It's Marine, Marauder, Viking. They're designed to be very, very nimble and very aggressive. Viking, Marine, Marauder are all fast units, so they are designed to be able to pick off things that get out of position. But let's take a look at a different opening from Marine King Prime. Completely different opening, same player, and it's going to, again, seem like an entirely different beast, but we don't want to think of it that way. We want to think of it as just a variation on the same basic idea, where Terran needs to apply pressure in the mid-game, and the Protoss player's goal is to defend. But the Terran player says, if I can do enough damage, especially once I get the medevacs up, then I can just keep taking expansions, I can always get ahead in the expansion count, and probably even add on some things like getting ahead in the upgrade count. So let's pop in there. And we'll go ahead and look at some more calm games where we see MKP doing some absolutely stupidly good micro. And a lot of times it's easy to say, oh, well, I'm not Marine King Prime, I can't micro that well. The important part is that Marine King Prime is moving forward aggressively with his units and this kind of thing. So already we're looking at this game and we're going, holy cow, this is such a crazy different game. We have the 2 racks opening. Combat Shield will be started in a moment for Marine King Prime. He's bringing like all his SCVs. This stuff is going to be kind of ugly to deal with. So we're going to go ahead and play out the early game at ultra super duper warp speed, because what happens at the start is not the important part. This obviously helps, but if we go to the units lost tab, we see that even though Protoss has lost more, Protoss has not lost gigantically more than his opponent. And as a matter of fact, what we're going to see JYP do is break through this without too much of an issue and retake his expansion. Now, the emphasis that I've been saying all game long is that Protoss has to be pretty damn defensive from 10 to 16 minutes. In a pretty typical game. Protoss has to be defensive. There's not that many ways for Protoss to do some huge attacks in that period of time. All Terran's trying to do is do damage and delay and get up a better economy and a better laking. And as we look right here, JYP is going to make some attempt at an aggressive move out back in the main base of Marine King Prime. He is essentially going for the same mixture, Marine, Marauder, Medevac. We see some cool exchanges happen. JYP is looking better and better over time. Wow, he might actually break Marine King. And it's at this moment in time that I want to stop. The Medevacs have just popped out. JYP, I want you to think of all these units all retreating and heading back home. Look at the Protoss composition. He's getting a Twilight Council. Maybe instead of a Twilight Council, he'd try to get a Robo. Maybe instead of a Twilight Council or a Robo, he might get 6 gateways total. Maybe instead of either of those 2, he would get a double forge. No matter what you envision, note that JYP can't really move out of his base because these Medevacs exist. The only way that Protoss can truly deal comfortably with Medevacs is by having a lot of units, or having some units with Blink Stalkers, or having some units with a lot of warp gates free. Notice in all 3 of these circumstances, you are pretty much talking about past the 14-minute mark for Protoss. And this is the basic idea. So, JYP botches this a little bit, gets into a direct engagement. And once again, he's going to be pulling back. He's getting into defensive mode. And per usual, pretend that JYP has plenty of units to defend against this. He can't lose to this. Pretend that for a moment. And then look at his vision. There is nothing JYP can do about MKP taking an expand, MKP taking an expand, MKP adding on another engineering bay and upgrading. There's nothing that he can do actively with his units to combat that. And that's what this whole daily is about. Is this period where there's nothing that this player can do to stop me from taking all these huge advantages. So, I'm just going to go ahead and watch the end of this game because it's really slow. And then in part 2, what we're going to do is watch a game where the Protoss steps into a massive lead at the start. And for any of you wondering what's on my hand, I'll tell you in the break. Frontal pressure with Medevacs is increasingly becoming the big standard in this matchup. Not so much drops at the back. Drops at the back are indeed very, very good. But it's the big attacks at the front that are becoming popular because you can lift up behind the sentries. Aha! MKP too good. And again, throughout all this, even if Protoss had defended with relative ease, even if Protoss had comfortably held all that off, nothing that he can do about us taking an additional base. And there's everything we can do about shutting that third down. So, once again, in part number 2 is going to be the real juicy bit of this daily, where we're going to take a look at Puma playing out of Terran versus Protoss, and in this mid-game, he is in an atrocious spot. He's up against a 3-base Protoss with a really clean defense. And we're still going to see how there's absolutely nothing that Protoss can do about us taking some big leaps ahead in that mid-game period. So let's go ahead and go to part 2.